He kissed his madam in front of everyone. The crowd froze. Cameras flashed. Gasps echoed through the hall. And for a moment, even time itself seemed to stop. Clara stood stiff, her expensive gown brushing against the floor, her eyes wide with disbelief. What did you just do?" she whispered, her voice trembling between anger and confusion. Tony didn't speak. His chest heaved, eyes darting toward the ceiling lights where a faint red laser dot had just vanished. He knew what had almost happened, but no one else did, the audience murmured. Some whispered words like disrespect and madness. Others just stared in silence. The woman he had served for years, the same woman who barely acknowledged his greetings, now glared at him as if he'd committed a crime. But the truth, that single kiss had just saved her life. The narration fades in softly. He was only a gatekeeper, poor, tired, and invisible. Yet in one moment of chaos he did what no one else could. He chose courage over fear. Tony didn't plan to be a hero. In fact, a week ago he was homeless, sleeping beneath a rusted shed with his documents pressed to his chest. The world had chewed him up and spat him out. Every morning he'd wake up and whisper, "Today will be different." But it never was. Until that one phone call. "Hello, is this Tony?" a woman's voice asked. He hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. Your application has been approved. Report tomorrow. We'll send the address." Tony jumped to his feet, heart pounding with relief. A job, finally. But when the message arrived and he read the words, "Gateman position," his smile slowly faded. He stared at the phone for a long time. He was a computer scientist, educated, skilled, but forgotten. Life had stripped him of pride, yet not his faith. He looked up at the sky that night and whispered, "I'll take it, whatever it is." The next morning, Tony arrived at the address, and it took his breath away. A massive mansion stood before him, tall iron gates glistening under the sun, water fountains dancing near marble steps. For a moment, he thought he'd come to the wrong place. Then a car rolled in, sleek, red, and silent. The door opened and a woman stepped out, graceful but sharp. She wore a fitted red suit, confidence dripping from her every step. She glanced at Tony with a quick, dismissive look. "What are you staring at? Close the gate." Her tone sliced through the air like glass. Tony quickly nodded and obeyed. That was his first day working for Clara Royce, the woman whose life he would one day save with a single, unexpected kiss. But back then, he was just another face behind the gate, not knowing that fate was already writing a story the world would never forget. That night, Tony sat on the edge of his new bed, if you could call it that. A thin foam mattress, one flickering bulb, and a cracked wall that whistled when the wind passed through. This was the gateman's house, a small room tucked into the far corner of the compound. Still, Tony smiled. "At least I have a roof again," he whispered. The smell of damp cement filled the air, but to him it smelled like hope. Outside, the mansion glowed like a palace. He could see Clara Royce's silhouette through the tall glass windows. Tall, confident, and surrounded by wealth. She didn't notice him when he stood guard at the gate. She never said, "Thank you." She barely looked in his direction. But Tony didn't mind. He was used to being invisible. Earlier that day when she had shouted, "That's your house, over there," and pointed to the small concrete room, Tony had bowed and said softly, "Yes, ma'am." He meant it. Gratitude wasn't about comfort. It was about having another chance. But fate had a cruel way of testing him. Each day followed the same rhythm. Open the gate, salute the guests, endure the insults. Some drivers tossed empty bottles near his feet. Visitors laughed at his worn-out shoes. And Clara's boyfriend Eric treated him like dirt. "Hey, gateman, move faster," Eric barked one morning as Tony tried to open the heavy gate under the rain. "Yes, sir," Tony replied, drenched to the bone. Eric smirked. "You're too slow for someone who stands around all day." Inside, Clara barely looked up from her phone. She was beautiful, but her beauty was cold. Her words carried the sharpness of someone who'd forgotten kindness. Yet Tony never reacted. Every insult was another stone added to the wall of his patience. He knew reacting in anger could destroy the little he had left. At night, he'd sit under the dim bulb, staring at his old laptop, cracked, outdated, but still alive. On the screen were lines of code, half-written projects, and a dream he once had, to build security systems for major corporations. Maybe someday, he said quietly. Days turned into weeks. Tony's body grew tired, but his spirit refused to bend. He worked like a man who knew pain was temporary. Then, one afternoon, as Clara and Eric prepared to leave for a party, she turned to him sharply. "Gatekeeper," she called. Tony stood up immediately. "By tomorrow, I want those weeds at the corner gone. And wash the car. Properly this time." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. Eric chuckled. "Look at him. Always, yes, ma'am, yes, ma'am. You'd think we adopted him." The car sped off, leaving Tony standing alone. He sighed deeply, gripping the wet gate handle. Little did they know, the man they mocked was not just guarding their gate, he was guarding their destiny. And soon, that gate would become the doorway to a miracle. Morning sunlight spilled across the compound, glinting off the mansion's glass walls. Tony swept the driveway, his back aching, his clothes damp with sweat. He had been up since 5 a.m., cleaning, washing, polishing, doing everything to avoid the one thing he feared most, angering Clara or her boyfriend, Eric. From the balcony, Clara's voice echoed sharply. "Tony, the car still looks dirty." "Do it again." Tony looked up, blinking through the glare. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. Eric leaned over the railing, smirking. "You see, babe, this is why people like him stay poor. No pride, no ambition." The laughter that followed cut deeper than any insult. Tony forced a smile and kept scrubbing. Inside, his heart sank, but his dignity stayed unbroken. He whispered under his breath, "One day, I'll remind the world that even a gatekeeper can rise." Later that evening, he overheard Clara and Eric arguing in the living room. "Where's the missing money, Clara?" Eric barked. "I don't know. Someone's stealing from my company. I've checked the accounts 100 times, she said, pacing the floor. "Every week, thousands vanish, gone without a trace." Eric's tone softened, pretending to be sympathetic. "Maybe it's just an accounting error, baby. You work too hard. Let it go." But Tony could tell something was off. The man's eyes darted nervously, his smile too forced. Behind the door, Tony listened, his mind racing. He'd once been a systems analyst. Before the layoffs, before poverty. He understood enough about computers to know how digital theft worked. But who would believe him now? He whispered to himself, if only she knew who the real thief was. That night, he sat outside his small room under the moonlight, his laptop balanced on his knees. The screen flickered weakly, powered by a cable he'd secretly connected to an outdoor socket. He opened a coding file, old security software he'd built years ago, and began modifying it, testing new encryption patterns. It wasn't about revenge, it was about purpose. While typing, he heard laughter from the mansion, Clara and Eric clinking glasses near the pool. He watched them for a moment, the reflection of the water shimmering between them like a mirror of deceit. Tony sighed and whispered, "One day, truth will shine brighter than wealth." The next morning, Clara's frustration boiled over. "Tony, did you touch my car keys?" "No, ma'am." "Then what were you doing near my office window last night?" "I was fixing the outdoor light, ma'am." She frowned, suspicious. "Stay away from my business area. You're here to open gates, not to snoop around," Eric added cruelly. Maybe he wants to steal too. Their words stung, but Tony bowed his head. "Yes, sir." When he walked back to his small room, he closed the door quietly and muttered, "If I ever get a chance to help her, I'll still do it," and that promise, spoken in pain, would soon save her life. Days turned into weeks, and tension in the mansion grew thicker than ever. Clara was losing money fast, thousands disappearing every few days, and no one could find out how. The company accountants were clueless, and her so-called tech experts kept shrugging their shoulders. One afternoon, Clara stood in the living room clutching her laptop, panic on her face. "No one can fix this. I've lost everything," she cried. Eric wrapped his arm around her, faking sympathy. "Babe, it's okay. Maybe it's time to let the company go. You've worked hard enough. We can start something new together." But Tony, who was cleaning near the door, froze. Something in Eric's tone didn't sound right. Start something new? He thought. With stolen money, maybe. For hours, Tony battled with himself. He knew he could help, but fear whispered, "You're just a gateman. No one will listen." That night, as Clara cried on the couch, Tony took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "please. May I see your laptop? Maybe I can check something." The silence that followed was suffocating. Eric's eyes flared. "What did you just say? You think a gateman can do what trained professionals couldn't?" Tony lowered his gaze. "Sir, I studied computer science before I lost my job. I might be able to help." Clara's face hardened. "You? A computer scientist?" "Yes, ma'am," Tony replied, his tone humble but sure. Eric burst into laughter. "Babe, don't listen to him. He probably wants to steal more data. Look at him. Can't even afford a clean shirt." Clara frowned, confused and angry. "Tony, please leave. This is not your business." Tony bowed and walked away slowly, hiding the pain in his chest. Behind him, Eric smirked, a smirk that said, "I win." But destiny had other plans. 3 days later, another $580,000 vanished. Clara nearly collapsed. "No, this can't be happening," she cried. Desperation replaced pride. She looked around the empty mansion and whispered, "Maybe I should give him a chance." Minutes later, she knocked on the small wooden door by the corner of the compound. Tony opened it, surprised to see her standing there. The same woman who had once ordered him to fetch trash now stood trembling, holding her laptop. "Can you help me, please?" she said softly. Tony blinked in disbelief, then nodded. "I'll do my best, ma'am." He sat down on his tiny table, fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. Within minutes, his eyes widened. The culprit wasn't outside the company, it was right inside. The breach came from an IP address connected to Eric's phone. Tony's voice was calm but sharp. "Ma'am, I think I found something." At that exact moment, Eric barged in. "What's going on here?" he shouted, eyes flicking to the screen. "You gave him your laptop? Are you insane?" But Tony had already seen enough. His instincts confirmed it. The real thief was the man pretending to love her. He looked up slowly, locking eyes with Eric, and in that charged silence, everything changed. Tony's fingers hovered above the keyboard as the truth flashed on the screen. A series of encrypted transfers, all routed to the same offshore account under a name he didn't expect, Clara Raymond. He looked up, his calm eyes meeting Clara's trembling ones. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "the person stealing your money isn't an outsider." "What do you mean?" she asked, voice cracking. Before Tony could reply, Eric snatched the laptop from the table and slammed it shut. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked, his face pale but furious. "You're accusing me, a man who stood by her through everything?" Tony stood his ground. "I'm not accusing, sir. The system log shows—" "Shut up," Eric roared, pointing a trembling finger at him. "You think you're smart, huh? You're just a gatekeeper who got lucky touching a computer again." Clara's eyes darted between them, confusion warring with fear. "Eric, let him finish." Eric forced a laugh. "Oh, you're really going to believe this beggar over me?" He turned toward Tony, his words dripping venom. "You've always looked at her like she's your angel, haven't you?" "Don't think I didn't notice." Tony didn't answer. He simply opened the laptop again, calmly, deliberately, and pressed one key. The projector in the living room blinked to life. On the wall, transaction records scrolled down like a waterfall of evidence. Dates, amounts, and recipient names filled the screen. Every dollar pointed back to Eric. The room went silent. Clara's hand flew to her mouth as she whispered, "No, it can't be." Eric's mask shattered. "You were supposed to love me, Clara. Everything I did was for us." "For us?" she shouted, trembling. "You stole from me, Eric. You destroyed everything I built." He took a desperate step forward, his voice rising. "I built you. Without me, you'd still be another lonely businesswoman working yourself to death. Without you," she said quietly, "I'd still have my peace." The words hit him like a bullet. Rage twisted his face. In a blur of movement, he lunged toward Tony, grabbing the laptop. "You think you've won?" Tony caught his wrist midair. His voice was calm, but his grip was iron. "This ends now." Eric yanked free and fled out the door. The sound of tires screeched minutes later. He was gone, vanishing into the night. Clara stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. "I trusted him," she whispered. "I let him into my world, my home. Tony knelt slightly, offering her the laptop back with both hands. "Ma'am, now you have the proof." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. The same man she had insulted, ignored, and called worthless had just saved her life's work. "Tony," she said softly, "how can I ever repay you?" Tony smiled faintly. "You already did, ma'am, by believing me, even for a moment." But fate wasn't done. Eric's anger would not fade quietly. Somewhere in the dark, vengeance was already brewing, and the next act would turn salvation into a fight for survival. The mansion had never felt quieter. After the confrontation, Clara doubled her security and filed charges against Eric. But deep down, she knew a man like him wouldn't disappear so easily. 3 weeks later, the biggest day of her career arrived. Her company's new innovation, a multi-million-dollar software launch, was about to hit the market. Investors, journalists, and politicians filled the grand hall, eager to hear her speech. Flashing cameras lit the stage, reporters murmuring about the resilient CEO who overcame betrayal. Backstage, Clara adjusted her red dress nervously, her reflection shimmering in the mirror. Tony, now her trusted assistant, stood beside her in a crisp black suit. "Are you ready, ma'am?" he asked gently. She smiled faintly. "I am, and I owe you for this day." But behind the elegance of the night, something sinister was brewing. In a dimly lit car outside the venue, Eric sat with two strangers, their faces half hidden in the glow of cigarette tips. "She'll be standing center stage," Eric said coldly. "One shot. That's all I need. Make it quick, make it clean." One of the men chuckled. "You sure about this, boss?" "In public?" Eric's eyes burned with madness. "If I can't have her success, no one will." Inside the hall, the lights dimmed. The host's voice boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the brilliant mind behind Phoenix Dynamics, Miss Clara Raymond." Applause thundered as she walked onto the stage, radiant under the spotlight. Her red gown glimmered like fire. Tony watched proudly from the front row, unaware that the danger was seconds away. "Today," Clara began, her voice steady, "we celebrate resilience, the power to rise again when life tries to destroy you." The crowd cheered, her words echoing like music. But as she turned to introduce Tony, a faint red dot appeared on her chest. Tony's heart froze. His training from years of technical work kicked in. His mind scanned the pattern, the movement. A laser. A sniper. He didn't think. He moved. "Ma'am!" he shouted, sprinting toward the stage. In that split second, he leapt forward and pulled Clara into a sudden embrace, his lips brushing hers in what looked like a shocking, reckless kiss. The audience gasped. Cameras flashed wildly. But above, through the sniper's scope, the target disappeared behind Tony's sudden movement. The gunman cursed. "He blocked the shot! Take them both!" Eric's voice hissed through the earpiece. But it was too late. Security swarmed. The crowd screamed. Tony shielded Clara as chaos erupted around them. On stage, Clara's shocked voice trembled. "Tony, what did you just do?" Still catching his breath, Tony whispered, "Saving your life, ma'am." And only then did she see the faint red dot flicker on his sleeve. Before vanishing, the kiss that stunned the world had just saved her life. Down the hall, Eric watched his entire plan collapse, his face twisted in horror as police stormed in shouting, "Nobody move!" The crowd turned toward him, and in that moment, his empire of lies crumbled for good. The hall was pure chaos. Reporters screamed, flashes burst like lightning, and terrified guests scrambled for cover. But on stage, the world saw something different. A woman trembling in the arms of her employee, the same man who had just risked his life for her. Security surrounded Clara and Tony instantly. "Get them backstage!" one guard shouted. They rushed toward the exit as sirens wailed in the distance. Meanwhile, near the side entrance, Eric panicked. His voice shook as he yelled at his hired men, "Finish the job, idiots!" But the assassins were gone. They'd vanished the second the shot failed. Then came a voice over the loudspeakers, one that cut through the noise. "Security, detain that man by the door. He's armed." Dozens of heads turned toward Eric. Cameras pivoted, phones raised. Someone shouted, "That's her ex-boyfriend. He just ordered them to kill her." It spread through the crowd like wildfire. Reporters caught every word, every terrified expression. Within seconds, the whispers became accusations. He set her up. He tried to kill her. Eric stumbled backward, face pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. No, that's not true. You don't understand. But it was too late. Tony, bruised and breathless, re-entered the hall with Clara right behind him. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some crying, all holding up their phones. Clara's voice rang through the microphone, strong despite the tremor in her tone. "This man," she said, pointing straight at Eric, "betrayed me, stole from me, and tried to destroy me. And when he failed, he tried to end my life in front of you all." Eric's knees buckled as officers seized his arms. "You have no proof," he shouted. Tony lifted the laptop he had secured earlier. "Actually, we do." The massive screen behind them flickered to life again. Footage Tony had quietly backed up the night he uncovered the theft. It showed Eric's digital fingerprints on every stolen transaction. Gasps filled the room. The evidence was undeniable. "Eric Raymond," the lead officer said as he cuffed him, "you're under arrest for attempted murder, embezzlement, and fraud." As Eric was dragged away, the crowd applauded. A thunderous, emotional wave that filled the hall. Cameras caught every frame. Clara turned to Tony, tears streaking her makeup. "You didn't just save my company, you saved my life," Tony smiled softly. "You once told me I was just a gateman," he said. "But ma'am, even a gate can protect what's inside." The audience roared in approval. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. "Who is he? Will you keep him on your staff?" Clara raised a hand, silencing the room. "From this day on, he's no longer my gateman. He's my chief of staff, and the heart of this company." The hall exploded in applause as lights flashed and cameras clicked. Tony stood frozen, humbled, and speechless. In one night, the man who once slept under a bridge became the face of courage and loyalty. And though the cameras caught their smiles, only the two of them knew what that moment truly meant. A bond forged in truth, respect, and one unforgettable kiss that had changed everything. Weeks passed, yet the echoes of that night still rippled across the nation. The footage of Tony's heroic act, the kiss that saved a CEO's life, had gone viral on every social platform. Headlines read, "Poor Gateman saves billion-dollar CEO." "The kiss that stopped a bullet." "Loyalty in action." "The man who defied death." TV networks replayed the scene on loop. Bloggers called it the most cinematic moment in real life. But for Tony, it wasn't about fame. It was about survival, dignity, and gratitude. Inside the newly renovated office, Clara stood by the window overlooking the city skyline. Her company had not only recovered, it had tripled in value. Investors saw her as a symbol of strength. But when she turned from the glass, her gaze softened. Tony stood by the door, dressed neatly in a black suit, no longer the dusty, forgotten gatekeeper. "I still don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. Tony smiled humbly. "You already did, ma'am. You gave me a chance to be someone again." She walked closer. "You were always someone, Tony. I was the one who couldn't see it." For a moment, silence settled. Not awkward, but peaceful. The kind that happens when two people finally understand each other beyond status or wealth. Outside, the city hummed. Reporters still gathered near the gates, hoping to get a glimpse of the modern-day hero. But Tony didn't care for cameras. He cared about something deeper. The lesson his life had taught him. Later that evening, the company hosted a quiet ceremony in Tony's honor. Employees clapped as Clara took the stage. Her voice, calm but proud, carried through the room. "We often overlook the people who guard our doors, clean our halls, or serve us meals. But sometimes, those same people carry the courage that saves us all." Tony reminded me that real wealth isn't in money or title. It's in humanity. The applause was thunderous. Tony tried to speak, but emotion caught in his throat. Instead, he simply bowed, tears glinting under the soft lights. When the hall cleared, Clara approached him with a small velvet box. Inside was a sleek gold watch engraved with 4 simple words. "To the man who saved me." Tony looked up, his voice breaking. "I didn't just save you, ma'am. You saved me too." They smiled. No words needed. From that day, Tony became a voice for change. He spoke in schools, telling young people, "Never let your uniform define your worth. The job you have today doesn't limit the destiny waiting tomorrow." His story became an inspiration, a lesson in humility, respect, and the quiet power of goodness. And for those watching at home, the final message lingered long after the screen faded to black. Never look down on anyone, because the person you dismiss today might be the one who saves your life tomorrow. Subscribe for more stories of kindness, courage, and poetic justice, only on Black Soul Stories.